The thing I notice about anti-marriage arguments is that they never give you anything to strive for. They never give you any kind of solution. It's just somehow to counter those who are pro-marriage. I guess to manipulate the people that are pro-marriage so that they don't value marriage. And the interesting thing about it is their arguments do not somehow make marriage invalid. It just makes them seem incredibly obscene. People with no boundaries, people with no accountability, with no human decency, with no self-respect. That's how they come off. Because to talk down to the thing that as a collective you need for healthy, suitable homes is to incentivize the broken home. If I were to say we need more nuclear families, I'm not just saying that because I like the aesthetic. I'm not saying that because of a photo, although those are beautiful family photos that I have compiled on my database, for example. I'm saying it because when I look at the data, whether it's crime stats, psychological difficulties, high school dropouts, runaways, you name it, mood disorders, substance abuse disorders, people self-harming. When I look at stats like that, and I know that they rank really high, particularly amongst those who are in the single-parent broken home dynamic, I'm trying to somehow decentralize that as our norm. I'm trying to distance us from the chaos. Because the same people that are anti-marriage, they'll look at a crime video involving our collective and ask themselves and others, why is it like this? Because of broken homes. When you are pro-marriage, you're pro the quality of a household. You're pro the quality of a community. And you're pro that enough to where any argument against it does not make any sense. Let's get into those talking points and try to rid ourselves of the mind control of those who are anti-marriage, because they have their own agenda, likely to turn us into breeding animals or something, like a factory, indiscriminately just birthing and birthing and birthing. That's what they want, rather than having any standards, rather than having accountability, rather than being a people with human decency and self-respect. They want you to just keep things as they are, further birthing into the abyss as each generation gets worse in its own mental illness. We have to fix this, and we have to understand their mind control. So the first thing that must be understood when these people who are anti-marriage communicate is, what is the point? What are they trying to get out of the pro-marriage side of things? I know they like to hit below the belt at marriage, but what is their solution? Do they have solutions? And not emotional solutions that don't actually make any logical sense, but a solution that can be on a system level followed. Because we want to regulate human behavior. We want to create amongst human beings consequences. We want to give them convictions. We want people to have shame. We want people to know that there is orderly conduct and disorderly conduct. We want people to be balanced. We want a humane society, a clean society, a well-functional society. And if they're willing to help us create that with their anti-marriage stance, then, so be it. But these people, that's not what they're doing. They're just going to be anti-marriage just for the sake of discussion. Not because sociologists or behavioral scientists, not because those who study crime and those who really understand research, or journalists, not because those types of people, and I am a journalist, someone who graduated from college with that, so some of their sources doesn't even make any sense, by the way. It goes against journalistic ethic to even cite certain sources, but not because of actual data that they looked at, but really because they just don't feel like it, will they preach this anti-marriage culture towards us. But, I'm paraphrasing, I believe it's clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson, when I say there is no empirical data to say that there's a benefit to the broken family. None. So for those who will say marriage doesn't benefit you, tell that to the 75% of white people that are married. Their collective is highly married, so it's considering all the benefits they have within their collective, how unified they are, their higher sense of esteem, their higher wealth, higher sense of unity, among other great experiences. Tell that to them. Tell that to the Asian demographic, who are, I believe, the wealthiest in the United States and the most married as well. And they impose strict standards upon themselves in terms of regulating human adult behavior. And you're telling me a bunch of people that don't even know how to get the one thing we can control. We may not be able to control where our minerals go, how many hectares of land we sell, any of how our image is perpetuated in media. We may not control that, but what we can control, what we should control, is the household. And we still won't do it. And yet these people are anti-marriage. For what? I will only respect if a non-black person is anti-marriage, which, if they are, wouldn't even be for the same reasons. If they are anti-marriage, it will be because they've been scorned. And for a moral reason, they just don't want to go through the pain of divorce. How noble is that? But if a black person is anti-marriage, it's because God only knows. I really couldn't explain why. Maybe because I have no idea. They don't even have a large enough pool of people, which is the first point I want to make. How can you be anti-marriage when you don't even have a large enough pool of people that are married? So what are you really railing against? What are you countering? What narrative are you trying to expound on if most of you won't get married? So when they're anti-marriage and you're only getting married at less than 50%, less than 40%, wouldn't it make sense that you just expand on the culture of marriage before you even have a blanket statement of what you think it is? You don't have too many people that could be the standard. You don't even, as an exception to the rule, have a rule. They don't even have a real culture behind them or set of values that make sense so that we could then hone in on that as a group. There's such a small sample size of people that they are more influenced by the broken home model. So that even if you're married in our collective, since the marriages aren't the dominant culture, it's more likely to be influenced by what is the dominant culture, which are the broken homes. So what are these people so upset about when they're so anti-marriage? You're not gonna get married if you don't put the value for it. You're not gonna get married if you're gonna talk down to it. And you're not gonna get married if you just look at the data, more often than not. What should be understood is if you're going to be anti something, you have to have experience with it. If you're going to be anti a narrative, you have to, from a series of reasonable expectations, explain why. Not if you were born into, on average, on high generational amounts, broken homes. Even if you're the first generation that had a nuclear family, if all of your ancestors had broken homes for at least 2-3 generations, you are starting from scratch. You don't even know what you're doing. You have to give us at least 4 or 5 generations after you before we can talk about being anti the nuclear family. So when these people rail against the few people in our collective that are married, and they'll say, well, They're not going to have the perfect marriage. They're not good people. You know how you can expand on that? You just have to keep getting married throughout the generations. And then each generation evolves their definition of marriage. You think that all white marriages throughout history are the same as today, so that the white nuclear families in the 1960s reflect the white nuclear family experience in this era? Or did they just evolve that culture because they have something to build upon? They have something to draw information from so that they can make sense of what whiteness is in this new age. They can redefine the family structure. They can redefine what they believe in within marriage. They don't have to totally dismantle it, and they haven't. But because they're constantly adding upon it, and they have a consistent culture of marriage, that's what creates and affirms the nuclear families in their group. That's what begins to be the image of family. Whereas because we constantly build upon the broken home model, it influences the image of family even for the nuclear families. Because it's the dominant image, it's the dominant culture, it's the dominant way of life. So that if you're really mad about nuclear families, no, they're rare in our group. You're actually mad at the broken homes, the single mothers, the absentee fathers. That's the people you're mad at, because they're so influential, they dominate every other way of life. So that even the nuclear families in our group somehow cannot contend with that. And there are more broken homes in our group than there are nuclear families. So you're really just mad, and you're just having misdirected rage at the fact that there's no real culture or order within our group. There's no real sense of balance and regulation within our group. There's nothing to build upon. Every generation, you're just starting over. Yes, you can change and adjust that, but you haven't. I listen to and actually have lived my entire life amongst white people, and I've listened to their talking points and how they don't like looking back at the past because it was way too, patriarchal this and conservative that. And that doesn't mean they're not going to get married. They just, on this stage in life, will have a new way that they feed on that, and maybe the future generations of them will have their way that they feed on that. But how is it that they've never gotten rid of marriage after all this time? No matter how many arguments against it that they have, why do they just still continue it? I think we can learn from them and their functional ways instead of constantly trying to speak against it as if it's not working for them. We are in their world, so to speak, not the other way around. And until you can, on a structural level, figure out how to get a world that actually you would benefit from, where you would feel safe in places where you're in droves, where you would feel like people are hearing you and you're communicating to the opposite sex and they actually respect you, to be in a world like that they already created for themselves, you have to have order. So, you'll often have these people that, I guess you want to call them social justice types, constantly against the white people. And all I can say is that they have order. So you could just talk all you want, but they're still going to have the structure and the power at the end of the day, and they still have the better behaviors at the end of the day. So anyway, I'm pro-marriage and pro the nuclear family. I respect non-black people's ability to be that as well. And I think that we can be people that work towards a healthy culture, but you got to stop spiting yourself. When people are talking about marriage, stop anti-marriage mentality, because it's not going to benefit you at all. It doesn't even make any reasonable sense numerically. And if anyone ought to be anti-marriage, the groups that get married the most still aren't anti-marriage, We're talking the Asian cultures that certain Asian cultures have been there for thousands of however many years, right? And they're still practicing marriage. I mean, I'm pretty sure they don't relate to every value system from 100 years ago, but they still constantly expand on their culture. So what you can't get done in one generation, you could probably get done 5 generations from now, but at least have a starting point. Anyway, that is all I have. I don't believe in the anti-marriage arguments when you're black. I just don't. And hopefully we can start realizing the absurdity of our ways. Pro-marriage, pro-nuclear family, for me, that is. I'm Gershly Karen Pierre. Thank you so much for listening.